listener production.
Hey, Sacha Barbour Gatt with you. Welcome to this Friday Arvo ep of The Briefing. You'd be hard-pressed to buy a pair of new headphones that aren't advertising the feature of noise cancellation these days. In-ear, over-ear, for work or working out, for study, for music festivals, removing background or outside noise has started to become an essential part of our listening experience. And let's face it, the world is getting noisier, not quieter. There's music, ads, cars. Our hearing is, in a sense, constantly stimulated and bombarded. So trying to block some of it out to help you concentrate, or maybe in an attempt to protect your hearing, doesn't sound like a bad idea. But in this effort to protect, we might actually be causing damage without realising it. So what is it about noise-cancelling features that could be damaging not only our hearing, but our memory and even our brains? Wayne Wilson is an associate professor at the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences at the University of Queensland, and he knows sound. Wayne, first off, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing today. Now, we are going to kind of get into this understanding of noise-cancelling headphones and what it could be doing to our hearing. But I guess it's important to start by understanding how the brain actually processes sound. Could you explain that to us in the most layperson way possible?
Probably the best way to think about that is the brain processing sound in stages, and thinking of that from the first or early stages through to the last or later stages. So in the early stages, the first thing the brain tries to do is just to figure out the basics of the sound. What was the sound? Where did it come from? And when did it occur? And that's happening a lot in the lower parts of the brain. Once the brain's figured out the what, when, and where of the sound, then the information is passed on to other parts of the brain. The language parts of the brain would then start to see, were those sounds a word? Were those sounds a sentence? If it goes to the attention parts of the brain, those parts of the brain can decide, will I attend to that? Will I continue to exert energy noting that? If it goes to the memory parts of the brain, those sounds might be compared to what has been remembered from previous sounds, and it might be decided as to whether or not those new sounds will be remembered in the future.
Okay. And is there an idea that our brains kind of need to be exposed to all sorts of different sounds, be it loud, quiet, whispering, hushing, chaotic, calm, whatever, a wide range of sounds in order for our brain to be able to work at, then disseminating those sounds effectively?
That gets at an overall principle called neural plasticity. And what that really means is simply the brain can change. And the brain will change depending on the stimuli it's presented with. So the immediate thought there is particularly for younger children. We're born with a brain that's generally pre-wired, ready to learn language. We've evolved to have brains that have nerves and connections that are ready to go to learn language, to hear those sounds and to make the associations to learn the language. But to achieve full learning of a language, the brain needs to be appropriately stimulated. So this is the idea of you won't achieve full maturation without appropriate stimulation. And if we think of that with a young child learning a language, they come out of the womb with their brain ready to learn. But then we have to provide the stimuli, talk to the child, give the child lots and lots, literally millions and millions of examples of the speech sounds. And as the brain receives those speech sounds, it will start to change its connections. It will strengthen some connections between some parts of the brain and weaken others. Another aspect there too is the simple idea of use it or lose it, in the sense that if you're not getting certain stimulation and your brain is not learning how to process that stimulus, you'll lose the ability to process that stimulus, or you won't, maybe not lose it on all occasions, but you won't achieve as good a skill. You won't achieve as good an ability to process that sound because you haven't been using it
Yeah, so does that then bring us to the idea of what some researchers are suggesting could be a possibility is that noise cancelling headphones are potentially not only bad for our hearing, but also for our memory and for our brains in general?
I think the key term there is bad. Well, bad is certainly a possibility. I think if we change the word bad with change,
Mm.
so the idea that wearing noise suppressing headphones could change the way our brains processing sound. And I'm arguing that because the change could be good or bad. It could go either way. So we know, taking the language example again, that if we find a child who's not developing their language very well, one of the responses we can give is to stimulate them with language, to give them lots and lots of the sounds of their language. And we might do that in a very low noise environment. We want to give them those sounds, reduce the noise, to give their brains the chance to hear the sounds clearly with no noise, to give their brains the chance to learn how to process those speech sounds. So that idea of giving the stimulus with low noise, we use that in therapy to help children's brains learn how to process sound. The possibility there, though, and this is what comes in with the long-term use of noise-cancelling headphones, is by presenting that ideal situation, nice, clear signal, low noise, yes, the brain can learn how to process those sounds in that ideal environment, which can be very good, but the brain might then not learn how to process those sounds in a typical noisy environment. You're given the sound in a clear way with low noise, you get really good at listening to that. Then when you take the noise cancelling headphones off and out you go back into the real world, your brain's going, hang on, what's all this noise? I'm not sure how to process sound in this noise.
So a lot of the time the argument around headphones, and I'm a millennial and I grew up in the early iPod generation where we had, the wired headphones that we'd blare at top volume into our ears and you'd end up damaging the headphones because you blared the music so loudly. Now the argument with that was that we were damaging our hearing. But if I'm hearing you correctly, the idea with what could be happening with noise cancelling headphones is that it's not damaging our hearing as such, but it's changing how we process sound. Is that right?
Exactly right. So the high sound levels damaging our hearing, that's more damaging cells in our ears, not so much in our brains. And within our ears, there are little hair cells. And when sound waves hit those hairs, the hairs move and the cells get excited, and that starts the hearing process. So the high noise levels, we know, and this is a very significant risk, damages those hair cells in particular in our ears. There's a huge problem in that space, particularly in our teenage and young adult populations who are listening to a lot of very loud sound, listening to their iPods, so that's showing my age, listening to their sound devices turned up to the max, going to concerts regularly and listening to really loud music. That's definitely damaging hair cells in our ears. And we've got some very definite research showing that some young adults are getting things like 200 and 300% of their daily dose of sound, way more sound than they should be getting. And that way more sound is damaging their hair cells, giving them hearing loss. And that hearing loss is permanent. But that's all happening in the ear. You're absolutely right. What we're talking about with the noise cancelling headphones isn't really about the ear and those hair cells. It's about the brain. It's about the brain and how the nerves are talking to other nerves in the brain.
I think it's fascinating. It's something that I don't think people would think of when they think of, you'd think on noise cancelling headphones, it allows me to hear better and I don't have to have the music as loud because I'm not trying to block out the sounds of the people sitting next to me on the train talking. I can just have my music on. It's fascinating that we could actually potentially be doing some damage with them. What about things like loop headphones, which I'm seeing advertised as, I've seen them advertised on like mothers groups where it's like, oh, if you're getting overstimulated by your crying baby, wear the loop headphones. It'll just dull the sound a bit for you. People are wearing them to concerts. It's cool to wear headphones, to wear earphones to concerts now to protect your hearing. Could loop earplugs be having a similar impact, even though we're not using them to play music?
Possibly, but one of the key features of neural plasticity, the ability of the brain to change in response to stimuli, is to enact those changes, the stimuli must be repetitive, intense, over long periods of time. So if you were to use any noise-cancelling headphones or any loop systems that are changing the sound that you're hearing, for that to lead to longer-term changes in how the brain responds to sound, you would need quite a bit of exposure, quite a lot of use of those headphones. We do know that the auditory brain, the parts of the brain that specialise in processing sound, are quite plastic, that they're quite able to change. And the easy example of that is if you listen to a piece of music a few times, you start to learn the music. You've only listened to it a few times, but your brain is already rewiring. Your brain is quickly changing its responses so that the next time it hears that same music, the neural firing patterns are already laid down. The communication channels are firing more efficiently. So coming back to that loop earphone argument, then possibly, it certainly could change the way the brain's processing sound because you are changing the sound that you're presenting to your brain. But to enable those changes, the neural plasticity argument is one that requires a lot of exposure to the changed sound, intensive and repetitive exposures. So if you use those loop headphones all day, every day, yes, you could potentially, you've changed the sound to the brain, you could potentially change the way the brain then responds to sound. But if you're using it intermittently to get that short break you need every now and then, the probability of those short uses, intermittent uses, causing major changes in the brain, the probability of that drops significantly.
Okay. So someone listening to this then might be sitting here going, okay, well, this is all well and good information, but what do I do with it? We don't have a concrete answer as to, yes, it's impacting how my brain processes sound or no. What would your advice be to listeners who use noise-cancelling headphones, use loop earplugs? How should they kind of go forward now that they have this information?
Probably the overarching response would be everything in moderation. And that's a statement that carries out through a lot of hearing and listening factors. So, for example, it's okay to listen to loud music. Just don't listen to loud music all the time. Listen to loud music in short bursts. Similar argument for using noise-cancelling headphones in moderation. It's okay to use noise-cancelling headphones every now and then, particularly in situations where it really does help and where the brain is benefiting from being given a clearer signal with less noise. But don't use noise-cancelling headphones all day, every day. That's a long-term change to the sound your brain is receiving. That's more likely to see your brain change how it responds to sound as a result.
Associate Professor Wayne Wilson, thank you so much for joining us today. What an interesting discussion.
No worries.
You heard there from Wayne Wilson. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you liked this ep, why not share it with someone who might be using noise-cancelling headphones a little too much? Give them a little lesson today. Look, we will be back tomorrow, of course, with the weekend briefing. Antoinette is getting deep and meaningful with all three hosts of one of the biggest podcasts in Australia. Yes, Hugh, Josh and Ryan from The Imperfects.
So I'd like you to all answer this question at once, if you don't mind. Who is the most imperfect of the trio?
it's not me, so it must be. Yeah, must be
I feel like it's just definitely me.
Yeah.
I feel like
I think it's you as well. Finally, something we're going to agree on.
I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you next time.